Does the Quran predict the end of Israel? The Quran, the holy book of Islam, has been the subject of intense debate and discussion throughout history. One of the questions frequently raised is whether the Quran predicts the end of Israel. Historical context. It is important to consider the historical context in which the Quran was revealed. The Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad between 610 CE and 632 CE in the Arabian Peninsula. During this period, there were several conflicts and tensions between the Muslim community and the ruling authorities of the time, including the Roman Empire and the Jewish tribes of Medina. Interpretation of verses. Some individuals interpret certain verses in the Quran as predicting the end of Israel. These interpretations often refer to specific events or prophecies mentioned in the Quran. However, it is important to note that the interpretation of the Quran can be complex and subjective, and different scholars hold varying views on this matter. 1. Verse 17 to 104. One verse that has been the subject of debate is verse 17 to 104, and that day, the day of judgment, will not come until the Muslims fight Jews and kill them, until the Jew hides behind rock and tree, and the rock or tree tells him, O Muslim, O servant of God, this Jew is hiding behind me, so kill him. Critics argue that this verse is offensive and discriminatory towards Jews. They claim that it promotes violence and animosity between Muslims and Jews. Supporters of the Quran, on the other hand, argue that this verse is a metaphorical depiction of a conflict between good and evil, rather than a specific prediction of the end of Israel. 2. Verse 26 to 193 to 194. Another verse that has been interpreted as predicting the end of Israel is verse 26 to 193 to 194. And we gave Moses the scripture and we dictated to him the laws and regulations, so that he might present it to the children of Israel. And afterward, we said, enter the promised land, which God has promised to his chosen servants. Critics argue that these verses imply that the children of Israel, Israelites, will be replaced by Muslims in the promised land. Supporters of the Quran, on the other hand, argue that these verses are not predictions of the end of Israel, but rather reminders of God's promise to the chosen servants. 3. Historical context and interpretation. It is important to remember that the interpretation of the Quran is a complex and subjective matter. Different scholars hold varying views on these verses, and their interpretation can depend on the historical and cultural context in which they are examined. It is also important to consider the historical context of the Quran's revelation. The Prophet Muhammad faced numerous challenges and conflicts during his lifetime, and the Quran provides guidance and instruction for his followers. While the Quran may contain references to historical events and prophecies, it is not necessarily predicting the end of Israel or any other specific event in the future. Conclusion. In conclusion, the question of whether the Quran predicts the end of Israel is highly debated. While some individuals interpret certain verses as predicting the end of Israel, others argue that these verses are metaphorical or taken out of context. The interpretation of the Quran is complex and subjective, and different scholars hold varying views on this matter. It is essential to approach the Quran and its interpretation with open-mindedness and respect for diverse perspectives.